On this season of Career Day with Friends, find out what it's like to be a stunt performer for Marvel Studios.
So they strapped me into the armored car where I just have cash just rolling in the back, just flying everywhere.
What it's like managing media relations for professional athletes.
It's like negotiating with a toddler sometimes.
Or jamming out at a famous celebrity's house.
He had his Grammy Award on the back of the toilet.
And so much more.
Now and then they would let out a gas that smelled like chili cheese dogs.
Went to Graceland for the anniversary of Elvis's death.
I would have them do some drills I saw from the Navy SEALs.
Sitting there with binoculars and staring at baboon butts all day. And
the one and the one make two. Oh, yeah. When they come together, it's only greatness, brother. The cream of the cream.
I'm your host, Ryan Haynes, and this is Career Day with Friends. Hello there, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Career Day with Friends. Our guest today is a Michigan native who began his career studying evolutionary anthropology and conducting field research in Ethiopia and Kenya, where he managed a research base on, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Hamadrayas Baboons. He also trained volunteers for environmental surveys focused around data collection techniques for conservation of primates. Please welcome our guest today, Chris Allen. Chris, how you doing, man?
Hey, Ryan. I'm just pumped to be here. It's exciting to, hang out with you again.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. We went to grad school together. It's been about 6-7 years, something like that, and time flies. I think we're like two kids on your end, one kid on my end, separated. So it's pretty wild. So the premise of the show, basically, I'm going to ask you a number of questions, mostly about your time spent in Africa. And then we're going to wrap up the show with some trivia at the end. So what do you say? You ready to rock and roll?
Yeah, let's hit it.
You spent about 10 months in Ethiopia living in a tent by yourself with a research technician. Can you talk about what your field research was focused on during this time?
So the time I was there, we were looking at hormone levels in baboons, and this baboon troops were comprised of one single male with several females, but then this single group would group together with several others, so there'd be about 200 or 300 baboons. And so we were really looking at, as organization structures change in the baboon hierarchy system, does this female hormone change? So when one male kind of stole or took another male's female, does that correlate with a hormonal change? And so I was really just kind of sitting there with binoculars and staring at baboon butts all day. And then if they would use bathroom, I'd go over there and quick sample it up. And then I'd go to a makeshift lab and we would do just a simple hormone assay and extract it. And then I would mail that back. I think to the University of Michigan, who was processing the hormones.
Okay, so just like a fancy professional pooper scooper.
Yeah, that's literally, I'd hike 8 to 10, sometimes up to 20 miles a day after them with just some binoculars and a little bag. And we'd also collect fecal samples and try to get skin cell samples so we could do DNA tests and look at DNA structure of the baboons. And for those, I think we'd send back to Max Planck University in Germany. They did a lot of the DNA analysis for us. And then I also more my technician than me, but he had been there for like 8 to 10 years, kind of running the show. He, mapped out, named all the primates in that troop and then kind of kept track of who they are, where they're going, are they going, what male they're with. When they have a baby, we record that, and we looked at, organizational hierarchical structure through just observing and naming.
Now, did you guys have any kind of GPS trackers on the baboons, or you just kind of follow and observe?
They had since did that after I left. I know they had done some GPS tracking and things. They tried before I got there with some radio collars, but we were in a pretty mountainous region. They would lose radio signal a lot, and they were having trouble with radio stuff. And I think after I left, they got a bigger grant to put GPS collars and do some GPS tracking. But it is really difficult because to do that, you have to sedate them usually, and you have to go through quite a bit of permitting and things to do sedation of wild primates to then put a GPS collar on them and then have all the software and data tracking. So it is quite expensive to put that stuff on from a research standpoint. But I think they have since did that to figure out kind of their general area where they kind of travel and things like that.
Yeah, well, you had sent me a couple of articles to review before the show, and it seems like the Hamadrayas baboons, their mating rituals are a bit different than other groups of baboons, and also they tend to travel in different packs and clans and bands and you know all of that. So can you go into how their kind of that mating structure was different? And how
and so like traditional, most other baboon structures, you have like kind of hierarchy. You have alpha males and you have kind of a hierarchy down in this giant troop. In these Hamadrayas baboons, you basically have one single male, and then all the males are kind of on the same level, and they just steal kind of females from each other. And so they're always kind of on alert for, is that male gonna take my females? But they band together for protection from other baboon troops, as well as from predators and things. Mainly from other baboon troops. Another baboon troop, when they get together, there's like 400 baboons, and everyone's just kind of grabbing females, and it gets pretty wild. I've been on a couple of the cliffs when there is two groups that meet each other, and it gets really, really intense. And so what they do is they try to make sure they protect, their females. But you see some really gnarly injuries, from that. And there's different strategies from males. There's some males that, only have one or two females, and they're a lot nicer to their females. They try to be friendly with others, other strategies, so that way other males aren't as likely to take them. They tend to have their females longer, even though they have less females. Then you have other males who are a lot more aggressive, who might have 4, 5, 6 females at one time, but it is harder for them to keep that many. So, they're constantly fighting and keeping that. So their reproductive years may be shorter, even though they have more females, because it's just, taxing on them to maintain that structure. And just to note, it is not that fun to be a female in this baboon society.
No,
it's pretty male dominated. And it is not a great society to be a female.
Their structure around like protection, but also gathering. Like what did they get? What did they eat for food? How did they gather that food? Did they do that in packs? Was it in groups? Like how did that work?
Yeah, it's actually pretty wild because the group has like maybe 200 individuals, and they all sleep on these cliffs during the day to be protected. So like you have a giant cliff that they sleep on, or they'll sleep in some trees, where they sleep in a protected area. But then once the day starts, they just kind of start wandering. And we couldn't, at least I haven't looked at research in a while, but we could never figure out kind of, because there's no singular male leader, who directs where they go. We at the time, maybe they have figured that out since, but they didn't know where it went. But you just kind of wander, and then you'll see 200 to 300 baboons just kind of spread out and just start foraging on the ground, little seeds, nuts, things that they find. They will catch a bird here and there, so they will eat some meat, but it's generally a vegetarian lifestyle where they find grasses and roots and things like that, and they just kind of scavenge across the kind of savanna as they go. It's a pretty acacia driven, dry most of the year, kind of grasslands that they wander around in. And there is lions and cheetahs and leopards and lots of things that will eat them. So they do, kind of stick together for strength in numbers, and they are pretty good about, kind of signaling, and they have signals, and they call when they see danger and things like that. But they generally just kind of wander around for, all day. The drier season, they have to go longer distances to find food. The wet season, they can usually stay generally closer to their, protected sleeping cliffs.
Okay. So it's more like almost like every primate for themselves, or every primate for like the small group that they're in, gathering the food, bringing back the food. They're not necessarily, you don't have 100 baboons going out, collecting all the food and kind of bringing it back to the masses. It's kind of just everybody does their own thing.
Yeah, they all just kind of wander and kind of graze and walk around, and they're just kind of eating and looking around and eating. as they go, and they'll, depending on the season and how much food is available, depends on how far they have to walk. They don't want to walk; they'd rather just sit at their sleeping cliffs and eat all day. But there's not food there, so they have to, in the wet season when there's lots of food and the food's plenty, they don't go very far from their sleeping cliffs. In the dry season, they do migrate a little bit, and that's what those GPS trackers are trying to figure out, is during some of those dry seasons, where do they go, where is their food, because they would disappear for certain times of the year where we couldn't find the troop that we worked with. Because the troop that we worked with had been there we've been working with them for 10, not me personally, but the project had been working there for 10 years. So we could, I could sit right next to baboons and they'd be fine. They were used to human presence, even though they're wild animals in the kind of middle of Awash National Park in Ethiopia. You could kind of sit with them and wander amongst them as long as you're respectful, and they were pretty fine.
Now, as far as your experience, so you had mentioned to me that this was you were pretty isolated. Now, was this something like you were living off the grid?
Yeah, we were fully off the grid. To get there, when we had a truck for a little while. It broke down for a lot of time I was there, but we did have a truck and it was easier to get there. When I had a truck. When I don't have a truck, let's say you fly into Addis Ababa, which is the capital. It's about a 4-hour bus ride to Metahara, which is just kind of a tiny little outpost town along their kind of one of their main routes. From there, you'd have to take a bus around the mountain through like some pretty gnarly backwoods roads to Sabure, which is just like a local tribal village. That road's washed out all the time. So, sometimes you couldn't get back to it. Sometimes you could. And then from there, it was about a maybe 4-mile hike to the outpost that we were at.
So as far as like coming by food, supplies, medicine, that would require like a full day's trip. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, once a month we would go in and do big supply runs into Awash or Metahara, which we go to the village and the market and buy a month's worth of supplies. And by the end of the month you're not eating as good. You're eating a lot more dry foods and things like that. At the beginning of the month you have more fruits and veggies and things like that. So it took some logistical figuring out, but we did have a research technician. He'd been there, and I did have someone that was a camp manager. She was in and out periodically. That would do some of the cooking and things like that, and shopping and stuff like that for the base.
So now, was all your research kind of documented via pen and paper?
Most of it was. And so when I was there, I was mainly just the research manager, the base manager. So I ran the base and stuff, and there were some researchers that would come out periodically that were doing the more intense research. So my role was to do some of the research and some of the ongoing studies, but it was more to manage the base, make sure it's still functioning, make sure our technicians getting paid, make sure any of our, we had to hire some guides to go with us anytime we were out in the field, because we were on the border of an ethnic conflict. So during most of the time I was out there, the two tribes that were kind of we were right on the border of were mostly at war with each other. So we would, hear some gunfire every now and again. And when we would hear that, we had to settle into the camp. But we did usually hire a guide, for some of that ethnic conflict, would be for also some of the large animals that are out there just for safety. So it was an interesting place just logistically to make sure all the food's there, make sure everything's there. So when the researchers do come out, they have access to all that stuff and they're not worrying about that stuff, but they're able to focus on the research, and the base is just kind of ongoing there and working and running as it should.
Did you ever feel like you were in a dangerous situation as far as like, animals that were out there, large animals, or like you had said, like those groups that were kind of in conflict with each other? Did you feel like you were in danger at any point?
I think the groups with the conflict with each other, not so much. They're mostly scared of each other. So a lot of it was like bluster. They'd, fire some guns and run away. We weren't seeing much more than like them, kind of manage there. You wouldn't see a lot more. They'd like steal goats from the other tribe. I wasn't as worried about that. Some of the big game, I was a little more worried about. Lions were out there. We heard lions a lot. When you're sitting in a tent at night and you hear lions kind of roaring right next to you, it's very nerve-wracking. We do some hiking at night into the villages and stuff. I had Haynes follow me one night for a while. That was pretty nerve-wracking. Having pack of hyenas following you as you're, making it back to your base. So there's been some times where, now that I'm older, I kind of question some of my decision making in some of those scenarios. But it does seem like I made it out. Have some stories to tell.
And then as far as so you're almost there a full year. So you probably saw some pretty interesting weather patterns. Were there any challenges as far as the climate that you had to deal with during your time?
Yeah, the rainy season, we had to rebuild our road several times just to get out when I had our trucking to get things out there. No one's going to rebuild our road, so if I want it done, I'd have to go sit there and rebuild it. The way we usually do that is you had a old rickety wheelbarrow, and there's tons of just lava rocks around because it was a volcanic hot springs that we were in. So you just tear apart an old termite mound and use a lot of that clay in some water as mortar, and then you just start hauling rocks. And because some of the hills you'd go up, you'd have to rebuild that road because you'd wash out, and so you'd rebuild the road up over the hill, and that's usually where you'd see those washouts. There wasn't the whole road wash out, but those tricky spots where you're going up a hill or you're going down into somewhere would wash out, and you'd have to rebuild. So we'd have to do that several times just for safety to get in and out.
So you must have been in the best shape of your life.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was a little twig because we didn't eat a whole lot of meat, and you don't eat a whole lot of limited protein, limited fats, because you're eating a lot of just veggies and carbs because that's what you can carry back there. So I was pretty skinny, pretty scrawny at the time because even though you're eating massive amounts of food, you didn't have that really holistic good diet. You're relegated to a lot of just beans and rice and some pasta. Yeah,
with the hiking and with fixing roads and digging and doing all of that, it's you're burning probably, who knows, 1,000, 2,000 calories per day.
Yeah, you go through weeks where I'm doing that every day, and then I go through a week or two where I couldn't find the baboons, and I'd just be sitting around a camp reading books. Doing nothing for weeks, a couple of weeks on angle. You go out and you look at the couple of sleeping cliffs that we knew there, they weren't there. I'd be surprised how easy it is to lose 300 baboons. It is wildly easy. There'd be times where it'd be super busy doing other stuff, and there'd be other times where it'd just be constant downtime, and you're I don't know what to do, and I just read lots and lots of just random books that I'd found because you're out in Africa, there'd be books that people have left over the years or you'd collect here. So it wasn't, you didn't get to necessarily pick all the books that you wanted. You just picked whatever books you could find in English. So there's a lot of reading and downtime.
Now, your time in Kenya was a little different than Ethiopia. So you were in a small fishing village, Shimoni. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yep.
And so now what were your exact responsibilities when you were living in Shimoni?
So I worked for, I started with a gap year program where you pay to go to a gap year program, it's called Global Vision International. And you pay to do kind of an internship thing for school. I did it for school, but some people do it for a gap year. And then I worked in the forest, and we did some marine fishing, and then we were in some schools teaching and doing some stuff. And then I ended up staying on and being staff member for their field program. And so we'd have it was a British company, so we'd have lots of, mostly people in their 20s. But you get some, people varying age spectrum, but, the majority were probably in their 20s. Would come and hang out, do some research based on what the community partners wanted. So the Friends of Shimoni Forest were sponsoring us. And so we'd have our community sponsors. Then we'd pretty much just kind of do biodiversity surveys. So we'd go out in the woods. We really looked at the Angle and black and white colobus monkeys because that's an indicator species of how well the forest's doing. So that was kind of the main species we looked at. We also did, just ecological surveys on butterflies, on human invasiveness. So we look at, trees being chopped down. We'd monitor and track deforestation and things like that. And then kind of lived in a little fishing village. And then, just really kind of walked around the forest and kind of helped out the local community partners.
Listen, I wanted to have you on the show because This is just I remember you touching on some of this when we were in grad school, but never really like picked your brain all that much on it. So, when I was coming up with the premise of the show, I'm just thinking about people who, I've wanted to connect with in life or I haven't connected with in a long time, and just trying to do a deeper dive into their stories. And I was like, I got to have Chris on because he's just had this experience that very, very few people have. And I've always respected you as a person, as an academic, and thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it.
It's cool. I haven't talked about this stuff or even thought a lot about this stuff in a while. So it was, fun to relive some of those experiences and kind of think them through again, because it's been a while since I've, worked in the, evolutionary anthropology field. Because now I do more, behavioral psychology, behavior analysis stuff. So it's been fun to kind of relive some of that stuff.
We're going to shift to, we're going to play a little trivia. And it's all Michigan themed questions. All right. So I'm going to hit you with 5.
It's been a number of years since I've been in Michigan, lived in Michigan. So we'll see how my Michigan knowledge is.
We'll see how this goes. So I have 6 questions here, and then I have one other additional question for you. So, all right. Number 1, this Detroit Lions running back holds the record for most rushing yards in Lions history.
I mean, it's got to be Barry Sanders.
Yes, absolutely. That was a gimme. I wanted to just get your confidence up. Number 2, this TV dad was known for having many household accidents that would lead to injuries in a popular Michigan-based sitcom.
Yeah, it's got to be Tim Allen, Home Improvement.
Absolutely. Yep. I put Tim Allen, Tim Taylor, accept both of those answers. Which one of the 5 Great Lakes does not connect to Michigan?
Ontario?
Yes. All right, man. You're 3 for 3 here. Here we go. What famous record label originated in Michigan?
Motown.
Yes. All right.
I see. Maybe I think there's a couple, but that's got to be the biggest, most famous one for Michigan.
Artists included the Temptations, the Supremes, and Diana Ross. This one might get you. Name this Detroit Tigers pitcher who was well known for his unique antics on the mound, including his many conversations he would have with the baseball. His nickname was the Bird.
Ooh, I think that was probably a little bit before my time, but I can't remember that one. I think it's from the 80s. But yeah, that one's probably
70s, 80s. Mark Fidrich.
Yeah, that sounds right.
So what's interesting? I had a coloring book about Mark Fidrich. You should actually look it up on eBay because your kids would probably love it.
I mean, I can see all the old videos of him doing it, but yeah, I couldn't pull the name, but yeah, I can, I know all the old videos of them with him talking to the ball and all this stuff.
The coloring book was great, man. It's like a whole story. It's awesome. So look it up. This Detroit Red Wings center led the team to back-to-back Stanley Cups in the 1990s.
That'd be Steve Yzerman.
Oh, all right. So 5 out of 6, man, 83%. That's not too bad. All right. And this is how we're going to end it. I just want you to tell me your favorite live sports memory in Michigan.
Ooh, there's so many good ones. I really love the 2008 Red Wings championship. That was one I loved because I love Pavel Datsyuk and Henrik Zetterberg. And that was a fun year to watch. But there's also some good ones. I'm a hockey fan, so some of the rivalry with Colorado in the 90s was great, and some of the epic fights were always fun live sporting events. So that'd probably be my favorite was the 2008 Stanley Cup title from the Red Wings, and then I can vividly remember all those fights in the late early 2000s, late 90s with Forsberg and Darren McCarty and all the animosity between the Avalanche and the Red Wings.
The Avalanche Red Wings, I can't say that name for some reason, rivalry was probably the best hockey rivalry of our lifetime.
Yeah, there's some epic battles, both in the playoffs and the regular season, both physical fights, fun games. It was, it was a lot of fun to watch that rivalry for years.
There's so much hatred there, so much, and I love it.
Not as much anymore. Pretty far past that time, but at the time, yeah, it was pretty intense.
All right, man. Well, hey, go back to your family. Thanks for coming on, and I'm sure we'll talk soon.
Yeah, of course, man. It's good talking to you. Take it easy.
All right.